I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we're going to have a little bit of fun reminiscing through some past takes that Cal and I have had for the 2023 or 2022 into 2023 rather NFL season. Now, since we haven't had an episode in a couple weeks, we just wanted to do kind of a fun, lighthearted one to get back into the swing of things. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to talk about some of our biggest hits and some of but also some of Callan's biggest whiffs from predictions for this past season. But before we jump into that, we actually do have a few little things of news going into next season for this offseason. So starting with those, former Raiders quarterback Derek Carr signed a 4-year, $150 million contract with the New Orleans Saints. So a new face of the franchise there in New Orleans. And also, Geno Smith signed a 3-year, $105 million extension with the Seattle Seahawks. So keeping the same face of the franchise there in Seattle. A couple of franchise tags, Tony Pollard with the Cowboys, Josh Jacobs with the Las Vegas Raiders, and Evan Ingram with the Giants all did a franchise tag. With the Jaguars. Evan Ingram with the Jaguars all did a franchise tag this year. And then a few tiny bits of news here. First of all, Calvin Ridley got reinstated to the NFL and will, of course, continue to be an Atlanta Falcon because...
No, he got traded to the Jags too.
Oh man, he did. So the Jags are making out. I completely forgot about that. So now we will be able to see Calvin Ridley play again and the Jags gamble on him and whether that pays off or not. And then finally, some sad news for Minnesota Vikings fans. Eric Kendricks has been officially released from the team. It was just kind of a cap casualty. He opened up about $10 million in cap space for the Vikings. And it's really sad to see him go, but thank you for all of the play, Eric. And he will go somewhere and still continue to be an absolute beast of a linebacker. So now we are going to jump on to some of those reactions to predictions is what we'll call it. Starting out with some good, because why not start out with the good? I'll take it first. One of my predictions that actually kind of hit was that I said that George Pickens, the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver, would be a dark horse for the Offensive Rookie of the Year candidacy. And he actually wasn't nominated. He wasn't one of the finalists, but he had a hell of a season considering how poorly the Steelers offense did in general and made multiple highlight reel catches that I think had a lot of people opening their eyes towards George Pickens.
Yeah, he looked like Pittsburgh's number one wide receiver, especially late in the season.
And then, Callan, do you have a good one?
Yeah, so one of my predictions from the beginning of the season was that for the Washington Commanders, that Carson Wentz would get hurt and Taylor Heinicke would take over and win the starting position. And then, which actually did happen, Wentz got hurt, Heinicke took over, and even though that he didn't play the greatest, he did play throughout the rest of the season, except for the last game, I believe.
Yeah,
I believe the last game Sam Howell started. So that was one that I felt like was pretty spot on. The fact that Wentz got hurt again, and his backup came in, played pretty well, and then was able to, well, not lead him to the playoffs, but almost lead him to the playoffs.
And then jumping on to my second and sadly final correct prediction. I said during one of our running backs episodes that Tony Pollard would overcome Zeke Elliott and really become that number one back there in Dallas. And though there's still definitely some question there, if you ask me and I think a lot of other people, Tony Pollard has emerged as that number one there. They're used equal amounts, I'd say, at least towards the end of the season they were. But Tony Pollard just really seems to be much more explosive than Zeke is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Zeke might even hit the free agency market. He might be a cap casualty. So
I might be surprised.
He really is taking over there in Dallas.
And then I'll let you finish out both of your next good ones.
So for another good one I had is that I had the prediction in one of our quarterback episodes that Baker Mayfield would be traded to the Carolina Panthers. And I hit that spot on. I had them that he was going to lead them to the wild card, which he did not. He ended up playing for the Rams. but I just thought that the fact that he did get traded to the Panthers, or did end up going to the Panthers, was quite the prediction to get right.
Yeah, certainly. Like you said, he did finish with the Rams, but I think he might be in LA there for a while now. He played pretty well in those final games with the Rams, but you smoked it that he was going to get traded to the Panthers.
Yeah, I always knew it was going to happen when they both came out and said they didn't want each other. It felt like a high school relationship where they both were like, no, we don't like each other. But actually they did. Oh, and then for my second one, I had the Giants would go back to the playoffs being led by Saquon Barkley as a reemerging running back. And even though he did not win Comeback Player of the Year, he was a candidate and did lead the Giants back to the playoffs.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that Geno Smith came out and had the season he had, Saquon Barkley would have been a shoo-in for Comeback Player of the Year. But nevertheless, he and that entire Giants organization had a hell of a season. So now moving on to some of the bad, starting off with one that I thought was hilarious. During our starting quarterback prediction episode before the season started last year, I made a prediction that the Browns, instead of using Jacoby Brissett, would actually trade for Jimmy Garoppolo from the San Francisco 49ers, which of course didn't even near happen. Jimmy Garoppolo ended up playing some games, but then getting hurt for the 49ers pretty early in the season. So it was just all around completely a whiff, to say the least.
And then for one of my whiffs, I had the leading receivers for the Green Bay Packers as Sammy Watkins and Juwan Winfrey, which were two terrible misses. It ended up being Alan Lazard, Romeo Doubs actually was the leading receiver. Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson were the leading receivers. And Juwan Winfrey was sparsely even used, and Sammy Watkins was released later into the season. So a big whiff there on the Packers wide receiver predictions, which was really hard to predict anyways with so much uncertainty. But I certainly whiffed on those.
Yeah, the double whiff.
Yeah.
And then finally, for my bad one, I actually had what you could say was a triple whiff, if you want to be completely honest. But I think it was something that a lot of people whiffed on prediction-wise before the season. I thought that the Denver Broncos would have a top 10 quarterback, running back duo, and wide receiver trio. Before each season, we do our predictions for the top 10 of each of those respective categories. And I had the wide receiver trio with Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Tim Patrick as my number 1. The running back duo of Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon as my number 3, I believe. And then Russell Wilson as my number 2 quarterback going into the season. Which, of course, Russell Wilson was nowhere near that. Tim Patrick was injured before the season even started. And though Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton did play well throughout the season, they were nowhere near the top receivers in the league. And then Melvin Gordon actually ended up getting cut and Javonte Williams hurt about midway through the season. So all misses there. Like I said, probably a pretty common one throughout the NFL, but nevertheless, 1 strike, 1, 2, 3, batter out, all missed there. So those were some of our kind of fun predictions that we either hit or whiffed on throughout last season. But now the past is the past and we will be looking forward. So make sure you tune in for tomorrow's episode when we do a little bit of reactions to the NFL Combine, as well as a tiny preview into the 2023 NFL free agency. So until then, don't forget
to eat the W.